ministers. And I've got a funny feeling that Pan Yaroslav Brisiuck, I'm asking to come, who now heads the Canada-Ukraine desk at the Foreign Ministry, and the Canada-US desk at the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine. I'm asking him to say a few words to us. Thank you, Pan Yaroslav.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaryckyj, for this introduction. It's my pleasure and honor to be here again. I'm here just for a couple of days, and I couldn't miss this conference for the world. It's an honor to be here among such distinguished participants, and it is especially an honor to speak after the hero of Ukraine, who we heard from, Major Zaryckyj. And when you look at this person, the defender of Ukraine, you see the strength and resilience and the courage of the confidence of this person, of our defendants. And you just know that with people like that, with soldiers like that, Ukraine will not lose. Ukraine will win this war. And like President Zelensky said in his remarks yesterday, many expected us to wave the white flag, but instead we chose to defend the blue and yellow one. And we have been continuing doing that for over 4 years now. At the same time, we're engaging in good faith negotiations, and we appreciate the help and support of our partners, including the United States, in trying to find a peaceful solution to this war. We have had several rounds of negotiations in bilateral and trilateral format, but what we see is that Russia is not willing to negotiate, is not willing to end this war. And the first time Russia started to even think about talking is when we showed our strength, when we started talking about Ukraine receiving Tomahawks, when we developed Flamingo rockets that began to hit targets inside Russia. And this is the only language that Russia understands. The conference today is dedicated to taking stock of Ukraine's defense capabilities and military capabilities. We're a different country now than what we were in 2022 when the war started. We have now Patriots, NASAMS, IRIS-Ts, F-16s, and these are the things that make the difference. And these are the things that can change the calculus of Putin and can help to stop this war. So what we need now, and it's a pivotal moment, we can get to peace and we can get a dignified peace that Ukraine deserves, because our sovereignty, our territorial integrity are the things that are not negotiable for us. So we need continued military assistance and of the nature that can actually change the calculus of the Kremlin. We need continuous sanctions pressure. There's a lot of room for that, including the sanctions, the shadow fleet that Russia continues to use. Like President Zelensky called them floating wallets, and that's what they are. I mean, they continue to finance their war machine. We need to stop it. We need to stop their banks. And we need viable security guarantees that will ensure that the war will not happen again. With all that, we're working together, and we appreciate the help that the United States and the administration and the Congress have been providing to us. And I want to thank you for your contribution for advocacy of these efforts. And once again, thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate being here, and I wish you a very productive conference. And thanks again, Dr.
Our dear discussion leader for a very important second panel. You've seen the all-stars of the first panel on the land issue. I'm proud to say that we managed to get a all-star group for our second, which is assessing Ukraine's maritime and coastal defense capabilities and needs. Discussion leader is Ms. Debra Cagan. I just can simply say I'm supposed to introduce all four before Ms. Cagan takes over. Ms. Cagan herself has been a mainstay here as a strategic advisor. On top of her formal posts, she has actually been a strategic advisor for several administrations, in several administrations, to a lot of the work we've been doing in the background. So, Deborah, I welcome you, and I welcome your sort of proactive ability. I think that it's going to show in terms of the discussions you lead. And then in terms of the three individuals, Captain Ryzhenko and Ihor Kabanenko, in cahoots with a character who's here as well, Glen Howard, well known for his 20 years at Jamestown, and now runs a Jamestown Foundation, and now runs the Sarasota Foundation. You probably couldn't get a more dedicated individual. He worked with Kabanenko and Ryzhenko, and I must say that I remember prodding him about the Navy, and he says, you know, the Ukrainians don't have much of a Navy. I said, well, think of something. And he actually started with the Mosquito fleet issue, and the Ukrainians outdid him and created drones, naval drones. And then I knew that we were on a good place when Glen Howard turned around and said, oh, guess what? Those naval drones are going to be as important as wooden ships versus steel ships in the future. So that's Glen Howard. And right next to him is Steve Wills. Dr. Wills, they call him a navalist at the Navy League, but he's actually man to probably one of the finest admirals America's produced recently, Admiral Fogo, and tell James that I feel about him that way. And so having this all-star lineup, I just, you know, I'm blessed. That's also, Ms. Cagan, it's all yours.
Thank you so much.
Right.
And thank you for the flattery, though. I think we're all blushing now. Good morning, everyone, and I'm delighted to be here moderating this very impressive panel. I want to kick things off with a few words to frame our discussion here, and then I want to go directly to our panel for their insight and wisdom. For too long, the world has failed to focus on the Black Sea and the critical importance of free and unimpeded navigation. And while any ceasefire appears more distant every day, there is still the reality of what a Russian permanence, even if it's just for a number of years, in Crimea means for its ability to continue to prosecute death and destruction, but also what this means for freedom of navigation and operations, not only from Odessa, but for Romania and Moldova and Bulgaria, and the ability to ship resources to landlocked countries through the mouth of the Danube. What we are witnessing is a new kind of war. This modern battle space is unlike anything we have ever seen before. And while this is not to say that future wars will be like this one, it is a good bet that the lessons learned from this war, and we should be extremely foolish, we would be extremely foolish not to take those lessons seriously, will be instrumental for how we view our forces and, importantly, our deterrent, including in the United States, going forward. Our ability to innovate and to produce at scale and speed, to be dynamic and flexible, will in this new environment often be the difference between success and failure. So there has been a great focus on the land, as you've heard, and air wars. But one of the most compelling stories of this war is what Ukraine has been able to accomplish at sea without a navy. This is a story that needs to be told, and the lessons it holds for every single country that faces tyrannical invasions and threats to its sovereignty is watching and learning how David can defeat Goliath. And I think that's a really critical point here, because there are many people in this town who never thought that David would do this well. Others disagreed, and I'm glad to say today that we were correct. With that, I'm honored to moderate this panel. And I asked our panelists to please keep their answers to about 5 minutes each, because what I'd like to do is encourage a discussion among the panelists themselves. If they disagree, they can argue with each other. I think that makes for a good audience participation here. And so I'm going to first turn to Glen. Glen, please help us with a bit of a scene setter here, if you would. Provide us with an overall understanding of the importance and uniqueness of the Black Sea, including not only its vital requirement as a transit route for goods and services, but energy production and the like. And how does Ukraine and its coalition partners ensure Russia cannot turn Crimea into another Black Sea port designed to not only thwart Ukraine, but Romania just across the way? And extra credit points for why this is important for US national security, because unfortunately, and I will be frankly here, there's too many people in this White House who do not understand the implications for the United States in the Black Sea, and they are massive. So please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for that great introduction. I really appreciate it. And as we say in Oklahoma, you're preaching to the choir. So certainly with the everything that's going on in the Black Sea is very, very important. And then I'll begin my comments by, first of all, you're spot on about the importance of the Black Sea. We've seen the rise of unmanned aerial warfare in Donbass and over the ground side of the Ukraine war, but the Black Sea has become what many experts refer to as a laboratory for naval warfare. So there's major innovations are being made in the way the war at sea is being fought. Now, as we begin discussion today, I completely agree with Deborah's comments. The United States this morning, in the last 24 hours, handed a diplomatic démarche to the government of Ukraine about Novorossiysk. And what's been happening in Novorossiysk has been very astonishing, because beginning late in November last year, I wrote about this in my Glen Howard Substack. Ukraine conducted a series of USV attacks on the port of Novorossiysk, which exports 1% of the world's oil supply through the consortium called CPC, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which exports oil from Kazakhstan, from Tengiz through the port, and the Russians oversee this. And that port generates profit and revenue for the Russian economy, and also plays a role with the shadow fleet that is operating in the Black Sea. So in short, what has happened is, with this revolution of warfare, is that Ukraine last November, December, attacked several tankers that were shadow fleet in the Black Sea. They also attacked they call them VPU, vapor processing units, outside the terminal, which is where they're offshore, they're buoys, they load up the tankers, and they transport this oil, puts it on the tankers. So what Ukraine did in these series of attacks on Novorossiysk was it destroyed the VPU units, preventing them from being uploaded for the oil. The second part of the attacks was that the Ukrainian, first time in naval warfare, unmanned, uncrewed surface vehicles, USVs or sea drones, attacked and debilitated a Kilo-class submarine. So this was very remarkable. It wasn't a cruise missile, but it was done with USVs. So this is very, very important in terms of the laboratory that we're talking about that's going on in the Black Sea and Ukraine's continuing innovation. So in a nutshell, what has happened in the Black Sea since the war began is that the Black Sea, with Ukrainians' innovations in naval warfare using its drone fleet, has pushed the Russian Navy back from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. Novorossiysk is also a part of a major naval base for the Russian Navy. They're confined to port. So they pushed the Russians out. One side of Crimea basically made Sevastopol inoperable because the Russian fleet will come out to sea to face because of the fear of the Ukrainian drone attacks. Then that in turn has freed up the grain exports from Odessa. So Odessa remains strategically important to Ukraine. And then against this backdrop, wait, I've got 3 minutes here. You saw 1 minute. So no, I got 2 more minutes. So what has happened geopolitically is that the Black Sea has become a closed sea because of Article 19 of Montreux. So the minute the war started in March 2022, Zelensky asked for Turkey to enact the Montreux Doctrine, Article 19. They closed off the sea. So now it's been shut off. The U.S. Navy can't get in. Russian Navy can't reinforce itself. So what Black Sea has become is a hunting ground. It's become a hunting ground for the Ukrainian USVs and their innovation. So against this backdrop, nothing can get in or get out. It's a Black Sea is closed. And so what we've seen is it's become a hunting ground for Ukrainian drones at sea. And so I call it basically the rise of Ukrainian wolf packs that are now circling and looking for Russian Shadow Fleet tankers. So it's become very important. But getting back to the demarche today, Chevron has a very big stake. It can't get its oil out of Tengiz by exporting through Novorossiysk. So it's tried different options to send it through the south, through the Caspian Sea to Baku. Baku to Ceyhan cannot, has limitations. So the only other route for them is to send it out by through export pipelines over land through China. So this is the same where you have with the demarche today. I think that what happened was the United States and Chevron were complaining about it, and this is the situation. And so the other development that has appeared within the Black Sea has been the rise of the Rubicon uncrewed sea vehicles that have been emerging and attacked in the Danube last last August. They attacked and destroyed a Ukrainian surface fleet vessel, but it's the first time they mounted an attack inside the Danube, attacking a NATO member state. So this is where we are. I'm at 5:15. I'll stop there. And
so I'm gonna take moderate's prerogative and say two quick things here. One is we're gonna come back. Great, thank you, because the passing of the mic will fall on clutchiness here. So thank you. So I'm gonna take prerogative. I want to come back to Montreux because there's a really critical important point, as Steve knows, that if Russia is granted some sort of permanence in Crimea, that then changes the dynamic of Montreux and whether Russia can bring new ships in, because then they can claim a Black Sea port under Montreux. And depending on how Erdogan interprets Montreux on any given day, because that's mercurial, that could affect what those relations are now. And then we'll come back to the energy piece as well. But please, Andrii, over to you now. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Andrii Ryzhenko, Captain. I was involved in many transformation processes in Ukrainian Navy, and currently I'm following situation in the Black Sea. And today I'll give you my vision about what is a present situation, what can be future at sea, and what Ukraine can do in order to ensure its maritime security. Next slide, please. First of all, I would like to begin my presentation from a statement that Ukraine at sea will fight with always a bigger enemy in resources, and this is must always push Ukraine to find a smart way how to defeat this enemy. Next slide. And here you see this is like a comprehensive picture what is going on now, and this situation at sea dramatically changed since beginning of the war. In beginning of the war, you remember Ukrainian Navy was pushed to the coastline of Odessa, Mykolaiv, and Russia blocked very quickly this area. However, because of using innovation technology, because of using unmanned system, because of using cruise missiles like Ukrainian Neptune, American Harpoon, French Scalp, and British Storm Shadow, Ukraine can provide significant damage to Russian fleet. And for this period of time, Russia lost 30% of their combat power in the warships, actually. This is 29 warships and 2 submarines. Interesting, this last submarine was destroyed by unmanned vehicle under the water, which is quite unique, actually. Most of these casualties happened between April 2023 and April 2024. But Russian also adapting quite quickly to the situation. This is why Ukraine always need to find other ways to get advantage. This situation when Ukraine now using this sea power, actually at least in some of the Black Sea areas, really push Russia to move the most modern vessels from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk, and it's reduced number of Russian ships daily spent at sea from 30-50 to actually 0 to 2. Now just very few Russian ships go at sea, normally close to Novorossiysk, launching caliber missiles to Ukraine. And they now mostly doing this like nighttime Shahed and cruise missile strike on you see on Ukrainian ports actually. Also, I would like to mention that Ukraine restore this sea lines of communication. Now it goes alongside territorial waters of Bulgaria, Romania, and Turkey, but it gives us economy to be able to run it and bring income. Please, next slide. This is Rubicon unit. Glen already mentioned about that. Russians created it a year ago, and now they're intercepting our drones coming to Crimea and to the Novorossiysk, and also they're conducting attacks to some of our ships, but we don't have too many big, actually we don't have at all big ships now. We have a small Mosquito fleet vessels provided by Maritime Coalition. Next slide, please. And here, this is what actually Ukraine should do now in the near future. You see this red, it's a node of Russian power, occupied Crimea Peninsula, and this is the biggest threat because most of Ukrainian seaports and bases within seconds or minutes from Russian airstrike, from missiles, from Iskanders, from calibers. It's very, very close between here and this port. This is why air defense is very important. Also, you see this is shallow area, and for Ukraine, important mine countermeasures, because if we would like to restore navigation, we need to check this area for mines. It's a lot of them because it's shallow. And we need to restore the sea lines of communication between Odessa and Bosporus. And we need to continue to conduct sea denial strikes against Russian forces in Novorossiysk, in Tavria Peninsula, in Sea of Azov, and Russian submarines, because there are not many of them, but they're capable to deliver missiles, including with nuclear power. And next slide, please. Next slide we'll be discussing later on. But this is generally concludes my this sitrep, what is going on now and what can be in the future.
So thank you so much, Andrii, because I think this is really important. So my key takeaways now from what you just said is that the watchword I would use is dynamic. This is a dynamic situation. It's not like old-fashioned warfare. This is a modern battle space. Unfortunately, when I talk to a lot of people around town, they still have this K4 model in their heads. And as I said to a British colleague yesterday, if I hear someone talk about K4 one more time, I'm going to scream because there's just no analogy at this point. It's not how the modern battle space operates. And I think this was very good. And we are going to come to what to do next, because I don't believe in talking about a problem without talking about solutions. But Steve, you have incredible background and considerable time that you've lived, learned, you understand naval warfare, and convinced that you, like Andrii, understand we're in a brave new world. So we know that rapid evolution means a whole new definition of kill chains. We know, importantly, for countries like the United States and other countries that have sea power, this anti-submarine warfare, which you talked a little bit to, Andrii, which I think is critically important and goes to the nub of why this is important to the United States, or why it should be important to the United States. But it also has huge implications for sea demining, as Andrii talked about. We know Ukraine is the most heavily mined country, both at land and sea, on the face of the planet in the history of the world. Nothing has ever been like this before. And unfortunately, people are still looking at like old Angola models to determine how to do UXO and demining. And that's just not going to work anymore. So, Steve, I really want you to sort of go at this and do this, because I think this is also going to lead us to our next part of the discussion.
Absolutely. And very much, Debra. It's great to be here to talk about this. So let me confine my comments to two specific points that Debra asked for here. Number one, implications in warfare going forward. The cycle of decision-making in wars very quickly. For example, in November 1940, the British mounted an air attack on the Italian fleet in Taranto with a bunch of old biplanes. And they scored a few hits, and it wasn't that bad. And the Italians were able to quickly fix a number of these vessels to get them back to sea. Just over a year later, the Japanese launched a devastating air attack on Pearl Harbor, again with hundreds of carrier-based aircraft. So warfare moves very quickly at the speed of effectiveness. The United States Navy is definitely watching everything that you're seeing going on in the Black Sea because, as Debra said, and as Glen said, it is a battlefield laboratory, and there's a campaign of learning that's going on there. We've seen the type of drone attacks that Andrii spoke about evolve very quickly from individual drone attacks at first to very coordinated surface drone attacks that sank such Russian vessels as the missile patrol ship Ivanovets and the amphibious vessel Cesar Kunikov. These are quite remarkable, and they look a lot like the type of attacks that manned destroyers pursued against capital ships during the First and Second World War. And as Andrii said as well, now you've got undersea drones that are in the mix now too, and we're able to attack and probably take out of the war a Russian Kilo-class submarine. That leads me to my next part on the warfare part. The submarine threat in the Black Sea is still significant. Russian submarines can kind of come and go still. They're armed with the Kalibr cruise missile. That's a land attack weapon. The next step in this kind of warfare is looking at a coordinated drone attack where air, subsurface, and sea and surface-based drones act together. And that's going to be a real challenge for any warship that's entering a littoral space such as you see in the Black Sea, where you can bring all of those capabilities to bear. And it would be very hard for any one individual surface ship or a submarine that's confronted with multiple unmanned undersea drones that come at it at the same time. Again, this is warfare that people are not fully ready for, I think, and have not fully considered. On Debra's other point about mining, it is absolutely essential to get NATO back into the Black Sea in some capacity. If my boss, Admiral Foggo, were here, he would foot stomp this a dozen times and say we should never have left in the first place. But the vanguard of that NATO effort has to be the demining effort. If you're familiar with the NATO standing mine warfare groups, there are two of these. They each conduct every year, and they did this in the Black Sea before the war as well, historical demining operations. So NATO vessels will go into the Baltic, they'll go into the Black Sea, and they'll look for World War I, World War II, and Cold War era ordnance and pull it up, because every year in the Baltic in particular, there's a Polish fisherman or a Latvian fisherman who gets blown up by a mine, usually some World War I or World War II era piece of ordnance. So it's vital to get NATO mine warfare capacity back into the Black Sea again, because as Debra says, this is probably the most heavily mined water space that's out there. It's incredibly dangerous. And at least NATO has some real experience and capability to work this. You don't necessarily have to bring lots of surface mine warfare vessels in. Most mine warfare today is off-board, conducted by remote piloted systems. We don't like to take a mine warfare vessel into the minefield. That's incredibly dangerous. So you can fly in mine warfare systems. We've got NATO members that are bordering on the Black Sea, so you're not violating Montreux for them to operate there. So we need to think very seriously about demining in the Black Sea, whatever the course of the conflict as it continues. Even if there's a settlement, it's going to be even more important. So mining has got to be top on the bill of things to do, demining in the Black Sea. Thank you.
That's great. And I think what I'd like to do now is expand out a little bit and talk about demining a little bit more. And by connection, the whole concept of Montreux and I do believe this, and I'm told that I can speak freely here. I think Montreux is frequently defined by whatever mood Erdogan is in on a given morning. And if you read Montreux, and there are a couple of nerds at this table who have read Montreux, and as someone who worked this for many years at the State Department, Montreux changed depending on where Turkey's mood was at on a given day. And I'm not going to give up this very good World War I document for them because it gives them a huge amount of power. Initially, some of these mines, they floated into the port of Constanța in Romania. Romanian ships were actually sunk. Fortunately, there was no loss of lives. And but this shows that there is a danger to NATO. Turkey has also found a floating Russian mine. that hit one of their vessels, and Bulgaria has as well. So this sort of, fake approach that Ukraine's not really NATO, well, NATO countries on the Black Sea are getting hit and taking losses. So I think that's a really critical point to throw in here. But if we could talk just a little bit more about Montreux and this concept, especially if any sort of peace agreement includes some sort of permanence for Russia in Crimea and Sevastopol, importantly here, and its closeness to not only Odessa, but a stone's throw from Romania as well. So I'm going to ask for Steve first, and then Glenn to just pipe up here, and then Andrii and this, because I really think it's important that people who don't understand war do understand people getting blown up by mines. And I think it's important to talk more about this, because I think people have forgotten about this critical point.
So just to follow up on the mine warfare conversation, we're going to continue. First and foremost, again, as I said, mine warfare is mostly off-board systems now. It's not necessarily reliant upon ships so much, and you can do a lot with drones that can be supported from all kinds of different vessels. In fact, early mine warfare was often conducted from fishing vessels because they were small, you could deploy them in mass, and they were really good at, they use nets, so you could use mines you could sweep up mines with nets, and it's familiar to a fishing boat kind of world. The other thing about Montreux that I know Debra knows too, it was really focused on capital warships and keeping big warships either in or out of the Black Sea region. But the rules on much smaller vessels, as mine warfare vessels often are much looser and easier to work with, based especially on the amount of tonnage that you bring in to the Black Sea. And the last thing I'll say is certainly Russia is going to be very hard over on trying to keep Sevastopol in any way. A historian told me once that Russia has been trying to operate a naval base there since before the United States was a country in any way, shape, or form. It's always helpful to remind the Russians that they probably wouldn't have Sevastopol without the efforts of John Paul Jones, who they hired as a mercenary because they couldn't win the war on themselves. So Sevastopol will continue to be a focus of effort. Thank you.
Okay, my comments and views slightly differ. Montreux is a double-edged sword. And so once Montreux and Article 19 is invoked, nothing can get in or out of the Black Sea. Prior to the Ukraine invasion in February 2022, the United States had previously deployed several Aegis-class destroyers inside the Black Sea, and they withdrew those ships. I don't see any political willingness by the United States to return Aegis-class warships back into the Black Sea, even if Montreux is lifted, but just because of the political climate of the administration. And I just can't see that happening. Now, what is the Russians, however, because it's remained a closed sea, means that anything Ukraine destroys, Russia can't surge back into the Black Sea with new warships. So it's cut off. And so the Turks have also said that even if there's a ceasefire, suspension of hostilities in Donbass, Article 19 will remain in place because they have to have a full-scale peace agreement on ending the war. So as long as that exists, then the Turks still have the control of the straits. Nothing can get in, they can get out. Further to what Debra said, the importance of Crimea is that Crimea, and the problem in this town has been a very long time, people never understood that Crimea is like an aircraft carrier that can project power. The Syrian Express that Moscow ran in reinforcing its military contingent in Syria to Tartus, the naval base, was dependent on resupply from Crimea. So once the Article 19 is removed and Russians can go in and out, then they can resume their presence in Syria. Now, on that note, the Russians still have a toehold in Tartus, and they still have a toehold at Hamim Air Base, but they're limited by it. And my good friend Ambassador Matt Brisiuck tells me that the Turks are not going to let the Russians back into Tartus. So hopefully that will remain the case. But if Article 19 is removed, then you have this geopolitical, then the Russians surging back into the Black Sea. Will there be U.S. willingness to send in Aegis-class destroyers? And then the other flip side of it is that most of the regional navies, like Romania, that has several frigates, won't come out of port because they want the U.S. Navy to be there to have its back. So now we're just kind of stuck in this kill zone. And the United States in the negotiations, Deborah, I know you warned me to stay off of it, but in the one thing that you could say to Witkoff's credit was that he was trying to get the Russians to unlock the Dnipro so that they could, because the Dnipro is Ukraine's Mississippi. So there's a place called Ochakov on the Black Sea near Mykolaiv. And this is where John Paul Jones was called into action. And actually, he's the one who seized the Turkish fortress and said, we should put artillery on that other side, on that very strategic peninsula there. And in the negotiations, the United States has asked for the spit that's located there, that little stretch of land that guards Ochakov, to be returned to Ukraine so that Ukraine can have some freedom of navigation security in that area. And I wrote about it actually on for Saratoga. There's an article called Unlocking the Dnipro where I talk about this. And it did come up in the negotiations. It was one of the talking points. But we're not there yet. So we're really kind of still stuck at the Black Sea being a closed sea. The Russians will surge back in if they can get back in. They'll bring in another Moskva class heavy cruiser to come back in, and that renews the whole debate about Odessa being a Russian naval amphibious assault on Ukrainian Bessarabia and Odessa. So in many ways right now, because they don't have the surge capability, Russians are really kind of on the back foot in the Black Sea. Everyone agrees with that, except for maybe the Rubio in the State Department today. But the point is that if they are on the back foot, it is beneficial. And it's very unclear what's going to happen in this type of post-conflict environment, because Ukraine, as Andrii has pointed out, has several frigates that they bought from Turkey that have several 600 sailors that have been trained by the Turks. And these naval frigates that are Turkish built will go in and return to the Ukrainian Navy and become the genesis of a new reborn Ukrainian Navy. So there's all these flip side arguments about Montreux, Turkey's involvement, and how we look at the region. And so it's very contentious. So I'll stop there.
So, Andrii, I just want to do a couple of things here and then turn this over to you. So a couple of things. One is, I really do hope the Russians put another big ship in there because target practice is a fun thing to do. And I think that in many ways, and this is leading to where Andrii has been, in many ways, the Russians have made massive improvements and countermeasures to a lot of stuff, but they still fight like Soviets. And they still believe bigger is better. And Putin's comments about his ICBM force recently is another indication of that, even though he probably hasn't upgraded any of his ICBMs in any time recently, so many of them probably don't work. So part of this, Andrii, is, there are things that Russia can do, but there's a modern battle space that would mitigate against that. And I think I'd like to have you talk a little bit about that, but also about, Americans, I hate to say this, are geographically ignorant. Most of them cannot find states outside of their region on a map. They would have a very difficult time. And even people who we elect to our elected offices in this country, I heard one guy talking one day and he started talking about one of the Great Lakes off of Chicago, but it was the wrong lake. And he didn't even understand that. And people elected him to office. So I kind of raised my hand and I said, wrong lake, but let's not go there. So I say that because I don't think most Americans, and I think people in this White House, do not understand with genuine certainty the distance from Odessa to Crimea, the distance from Ukraine to Romania, and don't understand that things are, 3 guys and a dog in a rowboat. are going to get there really quickly. And so I really like to have you talk a little bit about that, because I think that this is just not fully grasped by the American public.
Okay, can I get my slides back? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, first of all, I know Moskva cruiser very well because I studied a missile system on board of this vessel back in 80s. And I can say you, this was a useless ship for Russians to keep in Black Sea. It was designed for Mediterranean. They use it as a cruise liner during this war, and they get a missile. They were seasick, and first two Ukrainian Neptune actually hit this cruiser. And frankly speaking, I remember exercises back in the beginning of 90s, and they should be able, Moskva, to deal with at least 10, 12 such missiles, and they lost two. And it was their mistake, and we use it. This goes me to the fact that Ukraine must fight asymmetrically. We need to see what is the enemy vulnerabilities and exploit this factor. And it can make us successful. We did it a few times. We destroyed Moskva. Now we're using unmanned system, surface and subsurface. It's also a symmetric way. Don't look on enemy strength. Use of enemy weaknesses and exploit it, and it's easy. Yeah, just to continue what Debra said, it's really this northwestern part of Black Sea. It's really very, very small. Between Odessa and Sevastopol, 150 nautical miles, which is probably 170 American miles. Okay, and from Odessa down to here, very shallow area, it's 110 nautical miles. It's very shallow. It's 200 meters depth. You can use mines. It's a mine paradise. But it means if you say here, you listen in Sevastopol already. It's very close. This is why our forces should be on alert. Any vessel which is 40 meters greater will be very easily identified by Russians. We need to move them all of the time. And actually, they're doing the same. Because as soon as we see vessel in Sevastopol, in Crimea, we launch a missile. It's a Neptune, it's Atacams. One Atacam completely evaporates the Russian missile corvette in May of 2024. Yeah, with caliber missiles, vaporized. No more this corvette. This is why it's very different warfare. It's not ocean-going fleet. And my vision, I would just sell this to Turkish-built corvettes now because they're a big one. We don't have bases to keep them, and Russians easily can destroy. It's very vulnerable targets. Yeah, but this is just geographical issue. My main point. Can you go a little bit slides more when this? More. Yeah, this is previous one. This is model of Western operational arm. I'm working now in a company with teaching Ukrainians, retired US Marines. We come into the front line, we taking battalion, brigade, corps headquarters and teaching them. And the most important to give them this knowledge because it's allowed to Ukraine act asymmetrically, to use a center of gravity analysis, to look what is enemy vulnerability, and using a mission command. We delegate authority down to chain of command, and commanders can act much faster because in Russia only Putin make all those decisions, and in this case, surgeon can make decisions being on a line of contact, point of contact, unpredictable way because during operation planning we design a number of course of actions and branch and sequence plans, and actually economy resources because economy of resource and unity of command. It's the two principles of war with always we evaluate our course of actions. And partners may help, actually, US may help because Ukraine has a huge system. In land forces, we have 100 brigades. In Marines, we have 9 brigades. It's a huge amount of people and we need to reteach them. And if partner nations, US, can send instructors, people in a country to teach Ukrainians will be much better. It's a big, very big need of that. They are very good students, but you need to have experienced people with a tens of years experience, with a showing to people, with examples, and they understand in 2 weeks already. Yeah, because most of our people, our students, they were mobilized. They never know what is Soviet operational planning, what is NATO operational planning. In 2 weeks, they already understand it. And we designed this philosophy, how to do it. Also, you see, Major Shiraev was telling about new tactics, and it's really true. On 6th of January, a commander of land forces adopted MDMP, it's NATO military decision-making process. Now it's a law in Ukrainian armed forces, but it will take time to adopt it. But and also Ukraine need to adopt operational doctrine based, designed for joint operations when land, air, and maritime acting together. Because we really get a lot of hardware like F-16, Patriot, NASAMS, M777, but they must be integrated in one combat system and not to act independently. Actually, they can act independently, but it will require more resources and less efficiency. And you know, using this model, we described in Ukrainians how to operational art works. Only problem, we need more. We need to reteach teachers. We need to design the programs. And this is really what Ukraine looked for. And can you please, next slide, is just, I believe it's a summary. Yeah, this is my summary of what Ukraine needs to secure cost. It's a capability. We spoke a lot, and I agree. Capabilities, it's really advantage. Access to capabilities, technology, it's very big advantage of Ukraine. Because for Russia now, problem Starlink. They were using Starlink on maritime drones, and no drones go maximum range, which they can make, it's 200 kilometers with the telemetry in air. If they don't have Starlink access, you cannot use them. Joint operation concept, absolutely must. It must be acting Navy, Army, Air Force together. Training and education, also important, and more training in country. Why important in country? First, it's cheaper. It's 10 times cheaper, we counted it. Secondly, it's impossible to take battalion HQ 25 people, or brigade HQ 100 people, or corps HQ, which is 350 people outside. You can teach them in Ukraine, not far away from front line. Obviously, you can teach battalion, you can teach part of brigade or corps, but it's much, much easier rather than send them abroad. And continuous partner dime support, diplomatic, international, informational, military, and economic, we already spoke about. This is my little summary. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And I'm going to take a little sharp turn here to talk about, and I'm looking over at you, Steve, as well here, but I really want to delve a little deeper into the concept of joint and fusing. And you know, the United States military didn't want to do this until it was forced to by Congress. Then they got rid of Joint Forces Command, which was a huge mistake, because then they had to reinvent the wheel again. And what's interesting to me now is, based on what's going on in Ukraine, the US is looking at going back to World War II division models, because this whole brigade combat team piece just had too much separation. No one had the big picture of the entire battle space. And I use the word battle space intentionally, because we're not talking about a battlefield. We're talking about not only air, land, and sea, we're talking about cyber, and we're talking about everything else that affects this. And so I want to talk a little bit about what this means and how you do the fight. And this goes to the heart of what Andrei's been talking about, which is that you don't win unless you can effectively fuse all of this and have that big picture. And I think, I'm looking forward to the new minister, Fedorov, because who I think thinks this way, which I think is really important, and understands that. But also part of this is understanding failure. You don't have innovative success without failure. You don't know what's going to work until you try it. And when this battle space dynamic is something can change every 3 to 4 days, you have to accept that failure is going to be a part of that. And you don't punish people for that. You have them go back at it and do something else. So Steve, can you talk a little bit about this? Because I know this was always a bugaboo of my old friend, Admiral Fogo, who I hate to say I knew back when he was in 06, so the old people stick together here. So if you could talk a little bit about this, because I think this is, again, another lesson for the United States and why this war is so important. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So teach joint maritime operations at the Naval War College, so I'm familiar with this subject. It has to be an integrated effort. You're starting to see some of that in the in the current war between Russia and Ukraine. And that's why I spoke about the idea that you need this next step in drone warfare, is this coordinated drone warfare. It doesn't matter who owns the system, whether it's the Air Force, the Navy, the Army. You've got to be able to talk on the same communications networks, coordinate operations, and you're seeking high-level, operational level of war responses. This can't just be a tactical meat grinder, whether ashore, in the air, or afloat. Attritional warfare doesn't get you anywhere in a lot of cases unless you have a mass of superiority to begin with. You can go back and look at the Second World War, certainly as an example of this. The United States provided lots and lots and lots of truck transportation to the Soviets so they could get out of the attritional war with the Germans and actually roll west and focus on building tanks. So we've got to help with the logistics parts of this as well. In making a joint logistics picture, you can't just supply one part of the force, you've got to supply everybody. You have to have operational level of war goals that are agreed on by all the forces. You can't have these stovepipes that Debra talked about that we used to have prior to 1986 in some cases, where the Army, the Navy, or the Air Force would say, oh, I've got this great plan. And we've certainly seen the Russians continue to use these sort of stovepipe command structures that all lead to Mr. Putin being the final decision maker. And the last thing I'll leave you with, there was a US industrialist during the Second World War, Vannevar Bush, who was one of Franklin Roosevelt's many dollar-a-day people that he hired to help win the war. And they asked him afterwards, they said, well, how did we defeat the fascist powers? Because we're so, they were so focused, and they had, things like the Wehrmacht, the Joint Staff, and so forth. And he said, well, in the end, all roads led to Adolf Hitler, and he was the person who made the decision. And he had a 50% chance of being wrong every time. And that adds up. Where Bush said, we in the Allied world, because we're operating with a joint or true joint command structure, and you've got multiple different inputs to the commander, we're going to have a greater chance of getting the answer right over time, and we're going to get better at it. Where, our opponents will only ever have a 50% chance. If Mr. Putin remains the only quote-unquote decision maker, he's still at a great disadvantage, and that needs to be exploited through joint command systems, such as Debra discussed.
Yeah. What's really critical too for Ukraine, as Andrii and I have talked about privately many times, is that when you give authority to the people in the field at the front lines who know exactly what's going on, and you allow them to speak freely, you're always going to do better. And I will tell you from personal experience, I watched Secretary of Defense refuse to move from up-armored Humvees to MRAPs to defeat IEDs because they weren't listening. But the guys in the field were attaching broomsticks to the front of their weaponry to go after mines and IEDs. And the difference is, if you listen to them, you're going to perform better. And that's Ukraine is listening to the people on the front lines. And I think that's critical. Do we have time to take some questions from the crowd here? And if no one has anything to say, I'll gladly keep yammering on.
Well, one way, thanks, Phil.
Hi there, Yuri Makar, advocate from South Dakota. Question about how easy is it, or how difficult is it, maybe I should say, to defend ports and coasts? Like, can you really set up like air defense on the coasts and ports in that example? And then is a like a coast battle a viable strategy in the near future, or is it like a very distant future? like fighting Russia along the coast, maybe bombarding from the coast. Maybe the mosquito fleet is not there yet. Can you comment on that?
And then Steve, but I will say this, many of our NATO allies were much better at using coastal defense to defend sea lanes. And it's what countries develop when they don't have a huge navy. And when you have a huge navy and a huge air force like we do, we tended not to develop certain things that other countries did out of necessity. And I'm thinking of Norway in particular in terms of developing things that were mobile and that you could use. So Andrii, over to you.
Yeah, speaking about protection of port, it's really a serious challenge for Ukraine because Russians, most threat is air threat. Russians, they're using Iskander, which is a 1.5 kilometer per second, 1 mile per second, 5M number, just to destroy a small vessel, 30 meters, like training vessel. And from northern part of Crimea Peninsula to Odessa, it's only 3 minutes. And it flies on ballistic trajectory, following, and only system which can intercept is Patriot. And we have a limited amount of these Patriots. And in fact, they're working as a standalone station. Is what we're looking for, jointness actually, or synchronization of efforts. Also, they're using a lot of Shaheds and they're changing tactics. And they put on Shaheds additional devices, and they became faster, they became smarter, and it's just a lot. Sometimes I'm going to Odessa for these courses we teach, and recently we trained two surface brigades headquarters, and every night it's alert. Every night it's explosion. But actually, yeah, our guys now much better than before with different assets. It's issue number one. Second, with development of this Rubicon, it's also sabotage, and we also have a certain units which can act with that. Speaking about, you see, I think Ukraine now should forget about everything that is greater than 30 meters because it's easy to destroy. Currently, missile like NSM, it's Norwegian missile, it's 400 kilogram. My missile when I start was between 3 and 6 tons, much bigger. You can put these guys on small 12-meter boat and they can do the same effect as a cruiser Moscow. In fact, your Mark 6 American boat has a much better informational capability than Moscow cruiser. It's a secret, but I share with you.
So one second. So Walter, do you have a question? Because we are running short on time here.
No, but Glenn should also.
No, what you're alluding to is what they call seed denial
Go ahead.
capabilities. So the part of the presentation that's important is that Ukraine has pushed the Russians back. So they forced the Russians to now move all their ships on one side of Crimea, on the western side, to the eastern side, and now into Novorossiysk. So Sevastopol, everything is in port. So that's freed up the grain convoys, but that is what they call sea denial capabilities because Ukraine has done this without a navy, only with the USVs. Now they've taken it further with the Flamingos, and also when they were using the Storm Shadows, but they've also used USVs to push the Russians back into Novorossiysk. So the shore-based capabilities become much more resilient by the Ukrainians because of these things. But there's also political concerns because I have not seen any evidence of the use of the Storm Shadows in the last maybe 8 months. And it appears to have been a political decision by the Stormer government not to do that.
That's not correct.
Okay. Well, I don't know how to account for the Storm Shadows not being used unless they've run out.
I'll just say they're being used and leave it at that.
Okay.
I'm just, if I could. Strategically.
Oh, there's a question in the back.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, unless we're stuck.
My name's Simon Ostrowski. I'm from the PBS News Hour.
You're all right, so if we can do this very quickly.
Yeah, I had a question because I'm working on a story in this direction. We've talked a lot about how the United States has a lot to learn from the Ukrainians through this war. But my question is, has essentially USA dropping to $0 now impacted the way that America can learn? Has the learning ability become less as a result of Washington, the White House distancing itself, putting the European allies in between itself and the Ukrainians in terms of weapon sales? How does that impact our ability to stay at the cutting edge of war?
Great question, and I think the answer is yes. The less you invest, the less presence you have of US people on the ground learning what's going on. And I would say by turning over the operation of the coalition to the British, and the British are doing a great job, but we've cut off our nose to spite our face. And if you're not getting that exposure, you're learning less. And I do think that everything that Army is talking about now, that Navy is talking about now, they're not going to be able to pull that off without Ukraine. And it would be faster, better, and cheaper. And I would argue that this vaunted Golden Dome air defense shield that the United talking about, there's only 2 countries in the world who are going to help the United States with that. One is Israel, the other. And if you decide to not work with one of them, then we're going to cost our taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars in failed expertise because we're not listening. I hope that answered the question.
I'd like to weigh in too. If you're writing an article, you need to mention the Pearl Initiative. Okay, because in fairness to the administration, they have found a way for the Europeans to pay for U.S. weapons systems or any weapon systems to go to Ukraine, and the American taxpayers aren't going to bear the burden of this. So that part is very innovative. And now you have Japan getting ready to join the Pearl Initiative, and now they're pressing South Korea to do it. So there's a certain limitation on how much technology the U.S. can give Ukraine.
But let me just be clear on this point here, and this is what I'd like a little food fight at the end. The point is that the U.S. can very easily kill the goose that laid the golden egg here. And that means that some of the U.S. equipment is not performing as well as the U.S. thought it would, and it's being defeated, and we're not moving nearly as quick as the Europeans to make those software changes on this, So I think that as long as we are tied up in doing foreign military sales versus direct commercial sales, as long as we have our longer timelines, as long as we restrict how these can be used by third parties, our allies are going to turn to buying stuff from Korea and from other European countries. And a number of countries, there's been recent arms purchases that normally would have gone to the US that have gone elsewhere. So I think there is an issue that it's great that Donald Trump wants the US to make more money, but don't make this so onerous that people go elsewhere and then you lose this huge bankroll. With that, I think we're done. And I want to thank everyone for a great panel, and thank you all for listening.
Good thing about doing host moderation is the ability to. I think the best thing about doing host moderation is the ability to say, thank you for the work that's been done. This was kind of absolutely first-rate panel. I probably would have added to Glen's remark about why NATO isn't in the Black Sea. I would have said, Glen, can you worry about Romania and the Balkans? That seems to be an issue. And in the Caucasus, isn't it possible that if you give the Russians all the rights to do nasty stuff, not positive stuff, but even this Rubicon stuff, isn't that going to impact and make it still a Russian Ozero instead of possibly a NATO lake? Like if we could put a couple of boats in there, I was going to ask you that question. But
well, what I'd say the one thing that everybody here should walk away from thinking about today is this place called Câmpia Turi in Romania.
Right.
This is going to become the new logistical hub for overland supply to Ukraine from Romania via Poland and via Lviv.
Yeah.
And the Buchak region is going to be the Russians are going to start hitting parts of Romania like they did last September with the drone attacks over,
And
the
I knew
drone
that
wave
was
over
going.
Poland, right?
Yeah.
So this Buchak is really the place to be watching. Ukrainian Bessarabia is the place to watch.
Thank you, because I knew Deborah wanted to go there, and I'm just sorry, we have a lot of people to feed, so we couldn't.
But you're the boss, Walter.
No,
you,
this is just a good crowd. Folks, please come back in about 20 minutes. There are a whole bunch of folks we're going to try to feed, but in 20 minutes, I need all of you back. We have a very important message from Representative Bacon that I'd like you to hear. So again, folks, this panel is as good as it was advertised. And it's just brilliant. Thank you, Deborah. You will always be welcome with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. You did a wonderful job.